just welcome our panel for our panel 2. I'd like to first of all... welcome to panel 2. I'd like to firstly welcome Lilli Matson, our Chief Safety and Health and Environment Officer for Transport for London. And Andy Lord tells me there's some congratulations in order. You've you've got a qualification in safety or something that he asked me to mention. He did. No, he did. Honestly. Sorry, the mic's not. Yeah, no, genuine congratulations on that. Okay, so that's Lilli. Then Tom Cunningham we've got here, who is the head of bus business development transport for London. Welcome.
Thank you.
Richard Jones, Director of Asset Performance and Facilities, Transport for London. Richard, hello there. And John Earley, Managing Director of Abellio.
Morning all.
Good morning. All right, thank you. So we're going to start our questions, and I'm going to look to Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Got a number of questions around trends, bus safety strategy, and the bus safety standard. My first question, and I invite all of you to comment, starting off with you, maybe Richard, and then moving to Lilli, Tom, and John. So TfL missed its target of a 70% reduction in deaths and serious injuries on or by buses by 2022, in part because of a significant increase in the last 2 years. What is the cause of this, and how are you responding?
Thanks. I'll actually pick up. Yes, there we go. Morning, everyone. I'll actually pick up on this, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
And sort of give that general introduction on it. It's a very good, important place to start, because having sat through and listened to the earlier panel and a number of the questions raised, which were, I think, covered a lot of topics and important areas that we'll come on to, it is important to recognise the context of safety change within London. We, in 2018, when we set the Vision Zero action plan, set very demanding goals of that 70% reduction by 2022. And a 65% reduction in all collisions. Actually, when we look at the progress that London's made, it has outstripped other UK cities, and also the improvements on buses have been significantly in advance of what we've seen in terms of all surface transport. So at the end of 2022, we had seen a 61% reduction in the number of people killed on London's roads on or by a bus. When we look at we compare that to a baseline. When I talk about these reductions, it's compared to a baseline target of 2005 to 2009. So that, and then if we look at all serious and fatal, that is a reduction of 54%. So yes, we did not reach the 70% target. However, I would note in the years 20 and 21, we did actually, in the period of the pandemic, when the numbers of journeys were lower. So I think what that shows is it depends really whether your glass is half full or half empty. There has been progress. That progress is actually in advance of the reductions we've seen more generally. So there was a 52% reduction in all fatalities compared to the 61% reduction in terms of bus-related fatalities. We know that we have much further to go to reach that zero goal. And we have a safe system, which we'll, I'm sure, spend a lot of time talking about today. Some of the reasons why, and that this touches on your question, why we saw again an increase in 2022 was related to the fact that we were returning to pre-pandemic trends in terms of numbers of journeys. And passenger behaviour, but in particular around passenger behaviour, and I'm sure we'll come on to talking about slips, trips and falls, which are a key factor. There is some sort of post-pandemic legacy of people not holding on, and that can lead to more people falling over. But the most important thing to say is those trends are still downwards if we look at the period across the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic period, but still more to do.
Yeah, I do have questions on slip, trip and fall incidents, but perhaps if I could bring you in now, John. We've heard from TfL, so what are your observations?
So I think starting with the safety strategy, I think there's been progress made in a number of the 5 pillars. I think certainly as an operator we see fundamental change in technology on the vehicles and how drivers and frontline staff need to respond and react to those those vehicles and the training that they need. I think the safe behaviours from within the teams, from the training that TfL have done with operators and operators have done themselves, I think there's been a change there, and I think that's led to an improvement in post-incident response as well. I think there's just a lot more that we all need to do essentially on this, but I think what has changed certainly since the strategy was first set, and I think now is that it's clearly it's changed. In the last 2 years, I think the streets have changed. I think we've seen the peaks have changed through traffic. I think the use of the road space, as mentioned earlier as well, around the increase in light vehicles, around the e-scooters, e-bikes, etc. I think how we respond to that as a whole network, as operators and TfL and all the frontline teams, I think there's still a lot for us to do to understand what that means and how we need to respond to it. Really.
Thank you. So, very specifically, but slip, trip, and fall incidents, why are they increasing? Perhaps if I could come back to you, Lilli, and then maybe or Tom.
Yeah, thank you. And just to pick up on the comments that Lilli's made, I think looking at the numbers, we have done better than we thought, or much closer to that 70% reduction. If you look at the number of injuries and fatalities outside the bus, we've made significant progress there, which is where the initial bus safety programme, the original bus safety standard, was really targeting pedestrians, cyclists, those outside the bus, to reduce the number of killed and serious injuries there, because that's where the biggest challenge was. What we've seen in the last couple of years is a downward trend there, but we've seen an increase in injuries on board the bus linked to slip, trips and falls, potentially linked to drivers responding to incidents outside the bus and braking to avoid an incident outside the bus, and that creating a slip, trip or fall inside the bus. So I think there's a suggestion earlier on around looking at the unintended consequences of an action. That's something we need to look at a lot more, is what's happening now to customers on board buses and how much more work we need to do inside the vehicle to make that safer as well. And I think the other big change is that in a post-COVID world, people do seem to be less happy to hold on to handrails across all of our modes, particularly on buses, which does mean that the handrails that are there and the handholds that are there, which are well placed across the vehicle, in fact it's very well regulated as to how far apart those poles should be, particularly on the lower deck. It does mean that when the bus does move unexpectedly with perhaps a harsh braking or a turn, that therefore customers are more likely to injure themselves as a result of that. So we're looking at that now. It's emerging data that is changing, and as the witness earlier said, Andrew from Loughborough, we're making sure that we continue to look at that data and see where the trends are changing and how we need to adapt the bus safety programme to meet those changing figures and those changing behaviours.
So can I just follow up by asking you, I think you've answered one of my two supplementaries, but demographics. So on buses, 90% of serious injuries involved a slip, trip or fall with people aged 65 years and over, who made up 1/3 of those seriously injured. How are you seeking to understand the demographics of those being injured in a slip, trip or fall, and how will that affect the solutions you're putting forward?
Yeah, thank you. So really important that we do understand that, and absolutely right to identify that different customers have different vulnerabilities and different propensities to different behaviours on board vehicles, and that flows through to incidents and injuries that come from that. I don't think it's probably buses tend to have a broadly representative usage from across London, but with a slightly higher propensity amongst older population there. So we do have more older people using buses. There's potentially, therefore, we're also seeing that people who are perhaps older may not be quite as mobile as younger people, and therefore, if there is a harsh braking incident on board the bus, they may be more likely, therefore, to be injured as a result of that than perhaps a younger person might be as well. But that's the work we're looking at now, is to get into that detail and understand underneath that what are the reasons, and looking at the behaviour of the individual in that context and what we might need to do to change around the design of the bus so that we can hopefully design that out. So we're very conscious of the fact that we've got to look at what's happening first of all and understand that, and then find the solutions that we think are going to best address that issue.
Okay, and so, my final question to you, Tom. and I think we already touched upon this, but I'll still put the question to you. One of the main factors in slips, trips, and falls was the bus braking in response to the behavior of other road users. So can you tell us more about why do you think that, given this increase, are we seeing a change in other road users' behavior or a change in how bus drivers are responding to it?
Yeah, so I think, as John Murphy said earlier on, the roads are changing around us. There are more people walking and cycling, which is a good thing overall, because we're really keen to encourage more active travel, less dependency on the car, and people that use public transport also walk and cycle, and it's the right thing to be doing. But sometimes, I think what we're probably seeing more of is with more of those people around on the roads, and perhaps a bit more distracted now by mobile phones. Perhaps they've got headphones in, less aware of what's going on around them as well. That means that drivers are having to react perhaps to rather than perhaps being able to read the road ahead effectively, as effective as they could do, they're having to react in a much shorter time than they would have done before. And that means that sometimes they're having to brake harder, even though they're professional, as John said earlier on, John Murphy. The vast majority of drivers in London do a cracking job every day. They're professionally trained. They are really good at their job. They can only do that job, if people are, I guess, not walking out in front of buses, and if cyclists and other road users are using the road safely as well. And it's that recognition that we are part of that system on the road network. We're doing everything we can from a bus network perspective there, but we are operating in an environment where there are lots of other interactions going on around there. And it's the drivers preventing those incidents outside the bus, and I'm sure in many cases preventing fatalities and preventing many serious injuries out there. That is causing what are generally minor injuries on board buses, but in some cases they become more serious injuries. So it's that ecosystem and the balance there. It's moving the challenging fatalities and the serious injuries, trying to reduce those to minor injuries is all part of the Vision Zero approach.
Thank you. John, have you got anything to add to what Thomas already told us?
I think John Murphy mentioned earlier on this morning around the increase in e-scooters, e-bikes as well. I think those behaviours from an e-bike, I think legally they need to be held to 15 miles per hour, I think it is, before they change class. But what we see is that there are lots of modified e-scooters, e-bikes out there, and I think the increase in speed, the change in speed, can catch people out. I don't think, if you compare it to a normal pedal cycle, I think that acceleration that can be seen from an e-bike is actually quite startling, I think. And we see a lot of cargo bikes, we see delivery bikes, etc. So I think they filled the road space, and when we've got vehicles, around a quarter of our fleet at the minute is fitted with intelligent speed assist. When you've got buses that are held to 20 miles per hour, but you've got these lightweight vehicles that are swarming the bus, some of them on the curbside or coming around the vehicle on both sides, I think that then generates these harsh braking offences, essentially.
So my final question, Chair, and this is, we can start off with you, Lilli, on behalf of TfL, and then come to you, John. How confident are you of meeting the 2030 target of no deaths on or by a London bus?
Thank you. Well, so very recently we produced the bus safety strategy, which looked at that strategic gap that does exist. And really try to drill in and identify what measures need to be taken, whether it's further adaptations to the bus, but also within the wider context of how we're managing the road network. I would say that we have the evidence and the plan to enable us to do that. I think the challenge is quite significant, and it's not least significant when we consider the funding challenges that we and the London boroughs that we work with face in terms of modifying the road network, influencing customer behaviour. So I think it's around 70% of our bus network is on the borough roads, is that correct? Yeah, and 30% is on the TfL road network. So this is a joint initiative in terms of ensuring our buses run safely on the road network. But we have a very clearly planned bus safety standard and implementation of that, which is funded and is included in our business plan. We need to continue to uplift the standards of that and seek funding for that. Even within the strategy, though, it did identify a gap, and it's in that gap that we need to go further, working on issues like the speeds at which buses and other traffic are travelling, but also critically how we manage other users on the road network, which is obviously something that we've just touched on. So I would say my ambition remains absolutely true to this, but I do think this is a challenge not only for TfL, but for London boroughs and all who seek to make London safer.
John, have you got anything you wish to add?
Yes, I totally agree with what Lily's just said. There's clearly a gap for us, and I think understanding the gap and how we can fill that. I think technology and the bus safety standard and all the fleet modifications will take us a long way through that. Clearly, retrofit of things like camera monitoring systems, intelligent speed assist, they all help. But then there are some parts of the 2024 bus standard around front-end geometry that are very difficult to retrofit on existing fleet. So I think accelerating the programmes for retrofit where we can, with the right funding, is key. But understanding the gap and how we can accelerate the fleet change out, essentially, I think will bring the better, obviously much more further improvements, essentially. And I think again, all stakeholders involved. It's an open network, understanding what the challenges, what we control and what we can control, but then influencing the stakeholders of those that are in charge of things that we can't control, essentially.
Anything you wish to add, Tom?
So I'm just going to very quickly add is one of the issues we have had over the last 2 or 3 years is the lack of funding to do some of the retrofit work which John has talked about there. The programmes tend to take longer than the funding settlements we've had at any one point in time, so our ability to commit to it and deliver it within a funding settlement has been a barrier to making as much progress as we'd like. I think we're coming out of the end of that. As we see now, our business plan, as Lilli said, has that money in there. Key to that is the capital funding discussions, which are ongoing, sort of at a high level, which will obviously potentially have an impact on this. But we need to make sure that we continue to focus on that. And if we are able to bring forward our zero-emission fleet, so with my wider hat on with the bus action plan as a whole, of which the bus safety programme is part, under the bus action plan, we've got a 2034 target to have renewed our fleet with zero-emission buses. We'd like to bring that forward to 2030. If we do bring it forward to 2030, as John indicated, we'll be able to accelerate the rate at which we replace buses with older front-end designs and without the technology to vehicles that have got the better front-end designs. I saw one of the first ones last week being unveiled, really meets our standard, proper curvature at the front, much better vision for the drivers. Those buses are now ready to be ordered and to come into service. If we can get the funding to bring forward zero-emission fleet to 2030, that has a massive benefit to our bus safety programme as well by bringing forward the bus safety standard into the fleet 4 years earlier, potentially.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I go to other members, I'd like to welcome the London Academy of Excellence. I think they're here visiting us today. Is it morning? It just is, yes. Good morning. You're very welcome. We're discussing bus safety, and at the end we'll be looking at also underground safety, but you're welcome to leave whenever you see fit. But thank you very much for coming. Okay, so I'm now going to turn to Assembly Member Pigeon. Can I just remind members that we have quite a lot to get through in this section, so if they can keep their questions short, and I can also panel to be quite concise on their answers. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up from the discussion, I don't know if this is for Tom or for Richard, in terms of your analysis around slips, trips and falls. You're talking about the demographics of people, but actually, is there a particular location on the bus and in terms of bus design that might be causing issues? I always look at the back seats and think there is nowhere to grab when you're trying to get up. I always absolutely hate sitting there, but sometimes you have to, and you've tried to get up and you're worried you're going to fall. I'm sure it's worse for older people. So are there locations on the bus that you could work on the design that might help this?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Caroline. So the majority of incidents happen on the same level. So the original hypothesis that it might be around the stairs, that is an issue on the stairs, but it's the biggest number is on the same level. Quite often it's when people are actually moving around the bus. So perhaps they're walking to get a seat, or they're getting ready to get off the bus, or they're moving around for another reason. And that's when the incident happens. But looking at the interior of the bus, we've already done a lot of work on that, and we're moving into the second phase of the interior design. So making making edges softer so that when people do fall, that the consequence of that is reduced by having rounded edges and having padding around some of those areas where it happens. But absolutely making sure that hand grabs are in areas that meet all of our customers and not just people of certain heights or certain ability to move their arms around is important. We're continuing to review that. We're introducing high back seats on new vehicles, which means that people are less likely to go over the seats. They can hold on to the handrails on the top of those as well. And we are absolutely looking at that rear area of the bus. You may well see on some of our more recent buses, actually, we've reduced that to a 4-seat area on both rows there rather than 5, recognising that getting out of that middle seat at the back is perhaps not problematic. So that's an area we've already looked at and we're continuing to work on. The interior design is a challenge, meeting all of the requirements for accessibility, not just the wheelchair area itself, but the priority seats, making sure that we encompass all the people that can walk but really need to sit down when the bus is travelling as well. Encouraging as many people to sit is important, because it's definitely better to be sitting down than standing up on the bus as well. So lots of work going into that. And if you see some of the newer vehicles that are being introduced now...
Which routes?
So there are probably...
so let us know the routes.
Yeah, absolutely, you certainly can. But Route 63 and 40 that go near our
40,
office...
Yes, yeah. I've been on that one.
Route 111 that John operates over towards Heathrow. We can provide a list of routes
that
for those on there as well.
That would be helpful for us to look at. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Berry, you wanted to come in?
I did, yes. So one thing about the slips and trips and falls and being aware when the bus is about to take off, resulting from a coroner recommendation, you did introduce that quite long and annoying warning that the bus was about to take off. That was a voice saying so. That's been dropped. But is it not... Have you not been trialling other alerts and things? Because, I mean, I don't even know where I get this from, but I associate a double ding with the bus is about to move. So that must be like something from the old route masters. It doesn't have to be a ding, but they're not like just a little alert that could also potentially go off when the automatic braking system triggers, or when the driver themselves puts the brake down hard. These are things that surely would, if people are reluctant to hold on, would just give them that impetus.
Yeah, so we did do a trial a few years ago. It wasn't successful because it was automated and it didn't link in when the bus actually departed. The bus had either departed quite often or hadn't yet.
Yeah, so it took about 20 seconds to give the warning as well.
Exactly. So a good idea, but in practice, it didn't work. And we haven't found so far a solution that we think would directly work. And part of the issue is that it's quite often not the departing from the stop that's the point at which this happens. It's other braking.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah. So something we can look at, but so far we've not identified a solution that we think would work sufficiently well to do that. But I take the point. Let's take away and have a look and see whether there's more we can do on that.
There really ought to be a simple noise that would signify bus, hold on please. You'd get used to it really quickly.
I think from what I understand as well, the team are also looking at working with behavioural scientists to look at some of those nudge factors that may not be as obvious as a bleep, or it might be a lot more subtle than that in terms of it could be anything from the design to the visual imagery, or it could be vocal clues as well, which we're trying to work through with that kind of expertise to say what would just encourage people to have the right kind of safe behaviours as soon as they get on the bus and make themselves comfortable.
That's great. And so will you, as you said, you were also doing some investigations into the kind of locations and kind of things people are doing. Will you share that with us? I think we've already asked about the demographics, but I think it'd just be really useful to see what you're coming up with and what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. And I think the challenge with all this is there are unlikely to be one single answer to this. Like a lot of the other areas we're looking at, it's a complex area, and how we address it for different customers means that we might need a variety of different ways to do it. But absolutely, once we're getting to a position where it's ready, we're happy to share it.
Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you. Moving swiftly on, Assemblymember Boff.
Could I ask Ms Matson why the bus safety strategy has been introduced now? What was the spur?
So, and I think it's an important context for all of this discussion on safety, that there isn't the sense that you can have one fixed plan and stay with it for 10 years and hope to get to your goal. So we first launched the Vision Zero Action Plan, the overarching plan for this in 2018, and we refreshed that in 2021, taking on board new risks like e-scooters on London's roads. Similarly, with the bus safety strategy, there was a real need to look at how, with that challenge of 0 fatalities by 2030, we, through the way we manage and design our buses, we can get there. And this was really a very detailed and exhausting process where we're taking on board a lot of new evidence to help drive what is hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment in buses in London through setting the bus safety standard, through the way that we manage that fleet and deliver it. So it was really the opportunity to make sure that we had a clear plan and a clear evidence base to drive investment to keep us moving forward towards our 2030 goal. I have no doubt that we will revisit that before 2030. We are already looking at what the next bus safety standard refresh is. I think, when's the date for
27.
27. So essentially we want to make sure that you're constantly taking on board new innovation, and we have an innovation fund which we've run several times and we're rerunning it. New innovation, new approaches, but also reflecting, just as we've been discussing, that the way we're all using our roads and our behaviours on them does change in quite a dynamic way and over quite a short period of time.
So the way in which you evidenced the strategy was, how did you do that? I mean, did you just reference London or
no, there was
or
quite
did you go further?
I'm going to bring in Tom there just to tell you a little bit about it. There's quite a lot of evidence that informs it.
Yeah, so we use data from London because it's important. The road characteristics in London are different from other cities in the UK and across the world. We're part of the International Bus Benchmarking Group, and within that there are comparable cities, but there are also cities that are very different in the way that they're set up, and cities and countries with perhaps different ways in which people behave. So we have looked widely. We brought in expertise from outside of TfL to help us in bringing that together. And looking at the evidence of what's been happening in London, as Lilli said, to build on the original work we did a few years ago, to update that with the latest trends and the latest data, the outcomes of the work we've already done, because part of it is benefits realisation of understanding whether the things we've done so far are effective enough, and whether we believe they will be effective enough, so we're continuing to invest the money in the right way. And that came together in the strategy, which really set out the direction for the next few years. And we looked beyond bus as well. We did look at rail and other modes as well to understand the trends there and what they're doing about it as well. So it's genuinely looking around properly at what other people are doing to help shape what we do in the future.
Is there nothing to be learned from other cities?
Oh, there is, absolutely. And we engage with other cities. We're engaging with other cities in the UK. In honesty, most of those cities are looking to us for what we're doing. I was at a conference in Brussels last month, and the only other city that seems to be doing the work that we are is Oslo, in the level that we are at the moment around bus safety. And a real surprise talking to a bus manufacturer that doesn't sell to the UK, sells only into Europe at the moment, when I was challenging them on why they're not taking on board some of our bus safety features, was that customers in other cities are not interested in buying those on their buses. So we are leading the way on that. We're trying to encourage other cities and bus manufacturers and other local authorities, or transport authorities in other cities, to follow our lead. Some are beginning to, but we are genuinely well ahead of the curve in a lot of what we're doing now. So,
can you name one thing that we learned from other cities?
I mean, because
it does a bit sound like not invented here.
So we've certainly learnt things around from what's happened more widely in Sweden under Vision Zero, where they're much further ahead of us on that sort of on a wider piece. Just from the work in Oslo, where they've had a different set of incidents there, they've had a number of incidents there where drivers have been killed as a result of incidents there, where fortunately here we've only had one in the last decade or so. But learning from them about the issues that they are seeing will help us look at a risk that isn't huge on our list in terms of incidents, but one that we should certainly look at.
We did cast our net quite widely.
Yeah.
I mean, we are bigger than most cities.
Indeed.
So I should imagine there is more to learn from us. I noticed that 13 of the actions in the strategy have an indicative short-term timescale of being completed in the next 2 years. How do you intend to report progress against these, and also to provide updates towards the medium and long-term actions? How will we know that you're doing it?
Well, I think it's important that you and the wider public do know. So we report quarterly to our Safety and Sustainability Panel through our SHE, Safety, Health, Environment Quarterly Report. That will include updates on how we're progressing in terms of delivering the actions in the bus safety strategy, as well as our wider Vision Zero actions. That also includes the data in terms of the trends over the last quarter. And we also produce an annual SHE report, which will give you more of that overview. So through that, there should be regular reporting and update in terms of delivery.
And you'll report that to us, will you?
Yes, that is publicly available, and we're happy to arrange for that to be sent to you as well and shared, just to make sure you have full visibility.
Thank you. Mr. Eardley, how frequently do our drivers require, I'm going to be talking about safeguarding here, how frequently are drivers required to acquaint themselves with the Big Red Book?
So it's part of, drivers do CPC training, so they'll do a day's training per year over the rolling 5 years, and we also do induction training, and then we do repeat training through our safety school then at certain time points within the driver's career, essentially, with us. So at that point we'll go through what was covered on the induction, whether it be elements around ramp safety and all sorts of elements that from the Big Red Book that essentially will be picked up on at month 3 from a new starter that we've trained ourselves, and then through to year 2 and year 5, which is based upon the data that we see, where we start to see an increase in incidents or complaints, etc.
Are you satisfied? We heard a little bit of evidence earlier about the number of agency staff who are now being used to drive buses. Are you satisfied that they too are being acquainted with the provisions in the Big Red Book?
Yes, and from our experience, clearly we use one agency for ourselves, and what we've done is we've aligned our training with the training programme of the agency providers. So once that driver is onboarded with us, then that driver receives all the same training that our driver will receive as an employee of ours, essentially.
And sorry, just one second. Can I just ask John, for the benefit of the audience, could you tell us what the Big Red Book is? The book.
So it's a book. It's basically a handbook for drivers that covers all aspects of being a professional bus driver in London, essentially.
Sorry. Yes. Once you've been ploughing through the thing for a while, you just assume everybody knows it. So, how frequently do people have to refresh that knowledge?
So elements of the book itself, I mean, the book is obviously a large book. Elements of the book itself are drawn out by our own training internally, but also from the TfL training. So George McCarr within the TfL team will share elements, and in some cases whole sections of the book with the training teams across all the operators, and that's rolled out through training at certain times in the driver's career.
So how frequently, typically?
It's difficult because not the whole book is refreshed all at one time, but essentially all elements of the book are refreshed over a period of time. So, for us, that might be within a 2 or 3 year time.
It's a big book. It goes up to 199 pages, so it's not something you could easily quote from. Yeah. I raised this because a particular instance of where a 9-year-old boy was stranded late at night by a bus driver. I don't think it was from yourselves. And it most clearly says in those standards that a child should not be stranded irrespective of how they, where they're going or whatever. And so I thought I used this opportunity to find out how good the training is and how frequently people are reminded of drivers are reminded of their safeguarding responsibilities.
I think
is that something in the refresher?
Yes, it is. And I think as well, because, again, within the open and transparent culture that we have across all the operators with TfL, and we speak often at various touch points, at senior leadership level right through to at depot level, in contact level. So an incident like that, will be shared with the entire network. So it happens once and we all learn from it, essentially. And that happens throughout, whether it be complaints, whether it be incidents. It's shared with the network in an open and transparent way, so we all learn from it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cunnington.
Could I pick up? So I think it's important to also be aware that the Big Red Book is, part of it is training, but part of it is reference. So we wouldn't expect them to necessarily know the full content of that off by heart. Yeah. Some of that is a place where they can go to easily to refer to it if they are in an incident which perhaps isn't as immediate is the one you referred to there. Addressing that particular point, absolutely, the guidance is clear of what should happen in that circumstance. We're about to roll out our next TfL defined training course around equality, diversity and inclusion, and that training will be rolled out to all of the bus drivers in London starting from the end of this year, and within that includes a reminder of some of those key points around safeguarding, as well as the kind of more general awareness around invisible disabilities that perhaps is an area that we haven't focused on enough recently, and a real area that we can focus on.
Yeah, as we always say when we talk about transport, the priority for all transport services is safety, and I think safeguarding is one of those things as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I now look to Assembly Member Berry. We are running quite late now, Assembly Member Berry, so if we can rattle through.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as quick as I can. So I want to ask about intelligent speed assistance, and we've lost the audience, but still I think for the benefit of the tape I should clarify that is a system that reads the speed limit either off the signs or GPS and keeps the bus to the speed limit. And it was one of the first things that came into new buses as part of the bus safety standard. Me and my colleagues have been asking about this for many years now to see what the progress is like. So the new bus safety strategy includes an aim to increase the number of buses with intelligent speed assistance by 1,800 by the end of 2024. So how many of these are new buses coming in to make up the 1,800, and how many of those are retrofitted buses?
So the majority of those are retrofitted to existing vehicles out there. We've now got just getting on towards 1,200 vehicles which have got ISA fitted from new to the vehicles, and we've retrofitted a similar number already. And that 1,800 number is the additional retrofits that we are now able to go forward with because we've got the funding for that period to get that implemented. We'll continue to see it coming into new vehicles as they come over that period of time as well. And then the expectation is subject to funding, that we will continue to retrofit more vehicles beyond that to the point where it is economically sensible to do so. There's no point in retrofitting a vehicle that's about to be withdrawn by the time we get there. But there's obviously a cut-off at some point in time. But the aim is, therefore, to get the fleet to that standard as quickly as possible. And we can see real improvements from having fitted that. It does aid the driver. It ensures that they do stay below the speed limit there. And it's had positive effects, therefore, in terms of reducing speeding incidents.
Okay, great. So your goal is to have all of them done as quickly as possible, funding permitted, you sort of said there.
Yes.
So that's quite imprecise. Lilli, earlier on, you said that there was the business plan laid out, this 1,800, that would take us to around about half of all buses by 2024. That's what's in the business plan. Is that all that's there in the business plan, or have you got more of? Is what's in the business plan more ambitious than reaching half by 2024?
So obviously the funding within the business plan includes funding for all elements of improving bus safety. So that include other elements in terms of the bus improvement, as well as training, marketing, etc. So my understanding, obviously we're talking about a gradual turnover of the fleet, and 2024 is next year. My understanding is that it wouldn't be higher than the number that you've quoted. Okay. But what Tom has outlined is that as our commitment is that this is part of our standards. So as new buses come in, this will be what they will have. They will have ISA on them. The 1,800 is retrofitting existing vehicles. Out of that, remember we have around 9,000 buses, so that's 1,800 out of 9,000 on top of the ones that already have them. So if it's helpful, we can write to you and set out very precisely what the numbers are so you can get those.
Again, because the reason I'm asking is the budget process is coming up, so it'd be really useful to know what kind of money is needed to speed up retrofit, how much retrofit you get for what money, and where the sort of benefits of getting a new bus instead, which then has all these other safety features, then tips over. Just if you can give us an indication about that, it'd be really helpful, because we will have budgets to discuss very shortly.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. It is my question again, isn't it? I will carry on. Right. So there are a number of other things in the new 2024 standard that are sort of new technologies, things that need to be brought into buses. And again, buying a new bus is therefore sometimes better to do. So I'm just flicking to the right page. These include things like more cameras for better vision around the vehicle, improved frontal crash worthiness. I don't know how easy that is to retrofit. It might mean that a new vehicle is needed then. So to what extent has the global market for buses and buying buses been able to respond to these requirements? We talked a bit earlier about advanced emergency braking not really being available on that many buses yet. Are you having trouble with anything else?
Yeah, can I just say to the panel, please don't answer the question on advanced emergency braking, because that's at the next
I literally
question.
did anything else just then at the end of my question, on anything else than that, because we do have a question on that later.
Okay, I'll come back to that later then. So I think it's fair to say it's sometimes been challenging to take the bus manufacturing industry with us, because whilst we are the biggest buyer of vehicles in the UK, in the global market we're not perhaps that big, and the number of buses in the UK isn't as big as perhaps some of the global markets. However, those that are supplying buses to the UK market, so companies like Wrightbus in Ballymena, companies like Alexander Dennis in Scotland and Scarborough, and also some of those, and Switch in Yorkshire, but also some of those companies like Volvo have responded to that really well, and they have all produced buses now which will meet that front-end design for 2024. I don't think any of those are in service yet, but we've seen the launch of those vehicles and been to factory visits to see those first vehicles over the last few months as well, to ensure they do meet those standards there. And they do create that curvature on the front, which reduces the consequence if there is an incident involving an impact. It's more likely to deflect the individual away from the vehicle to minimise the injuries. And there's also softer panelling around that bottom of the vehicle as well to therefore slightly reduce the impact of that actual collision itself. And with that, it also improves the direct vision, because by having that curved windscreen, it moves what's called the A-pillars, which is the blocks at the corner of the windscreen, back a little bit, which gives the driver a better view around the front of the vehicle as well. So when you combine all of that with the camera monitoring systems and the improved vision around the vehicle, that then gives the driver a much better view around the vehicle to enable them to understand the other road users around them and to make sure they can move the vehicle safely. So the manufacturers have responded to our ask. It's taken some time to do that. We have challenged them. We've asked them to do things faster than perhaps they were always ready to do that. But I think we will see products on the street in the second half of next year, by the second half of next year, which will meet that standard and will really make that change forward now. And the 2024 standard is the biggest change we've had so far. We're going to talk about AEB in a moment, but just that front-end design and some of that interior design as well are real, they're much bigger steps perhaps than the 2019 and the 2021 standards have been.
Thank you very much. Then the bus safety strategy does specifically state that due to some supply challenges globally, there have needed to be exceptions granted to new buses entering the fleet up to now. Can you tell us, maybe you want to write to us and give us a list of those if it's more complicated than just a few sentences?
Yeah, I can do. It's quite often the fact they're very close to the standard but don't quite meet it. So they've met our ambition to make things a lot better than they are now, but they've somehow not quite met the letter of the specification. And in other cases, it may be that the bus is enabled to do it in the future, but it's not switched on yet. So we can write to you with those details.
Chair, I missed something you said when I was asking a question there a minute ago. Are you trying to get my attention?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay, can I carry on with my final question? Excellent. I've got two very, very brief things to say. You mentioned Wrightbus just then, and Wrightbus make the new Routemaster buses. To what extent are they part of your future plans? They presumably don't meet all the new standards. Are you asking them to produce one that does, or is that going to be phased out?
So the model that was used to buy new route masters, which was very much led by a policy decision to have open platform boarding at the back and the design of vehicles back then, where we bought the vehicles, that isn't necessarily the model that it's not the model we're using now. The model we've used since then is that the operators procure the vehicles and that we pay for those through the operating cost of the contract. Wrightbus have developed new zero-emission vehicles. John's got a number of them in his fleet, and others are buying them as well. There are no plans to buy a direct descendant of the new Routemaster vehicle at this stage here, but we would hope and expect Wrightbus, as well as the other UK manufacturers, to continue to respond to our ask in terms of zero-emission and design, and to design vehicles. And John perhaps has got a bit of experience of what the new vehicles are like, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So, Route 111 has got the Wrightbus Electroliner running on it. They were the first into London, and essentially it's got all of the previous bus safety standard elements in there. It features the high back seats as well. It's all of the occupant safety elements within there around trying to create a flat floor with an open space, essentially with integral hand grabs essentially on every seat. All that was built into it. It's got the intelligent speed assist, it's got the CMS cameras fitted, etc. But we've also now got the next generation of the Wrightbus vehicle. And we work very closely with our supply chain, as does TfL as well, around all the vehicles need to be approved for use in the network, essentially. So Wrightbus, Alexander Dennis, Switch, etc. All those vehicles have to be type approved, essentially. And we'll have a Wrightbus vehicle, the single deck version, will be the first, I believe, into London that will have the 2024 front-end geometry, essentially, with the softer light cowls, with the wiper arms above the windscreen, etc. And then, as Tom says, this rounded windscreen that gives the driver much better direct vision across the roadway, essentially. So they'll be in service. They're just been finalised. They were signed off last week. They'll be in service this side of Christmas, I see. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. And yeah, no, I wasn't trying to criticise Wrightbus. We gave them, as a city, quite a difficult job to do there with a bespoke bus. Yeah. And I think, credit that they produce something. But my question was really, part of your safety improvements is going to be phasing those buses out as soon as possible, effectively, because you're not commissioning a new one.
No, so those vehicles have got a design life and a depreciation policy of about 14 years. So those vehicles, the last of those vehicles would leave the fleet if nothing else happened in about 2031. And they start going probably in about 4 or 5 years' time. We're in the middle of doing a midlife refurbishment on those vehicles at the moment, because having invested in them, there is an expectation they keep on being used. We are looking at the moment around the option to retrofit CMS, the camera monitoring system, to those vehicles as a way forward. We've done some trials and we're looking to do that. So there are some things that can be done to those vehicles, but other areas where it would be more difficult, particularly front-end design, because that's obviously structural. So we're looking case by case, fleet by fleet to vehicles. It's important that we do recognise the investment that operators and finance companies have put into our fleet over the last few years, and where we can optimise those to meet the latest standards, we'll do it. If it's not technically feasible, we'll have to think hard about how we can address that, perhaps by replacing them with new vehicles sooner.
Okay, thank you very much. And then back to the budget questions again, more broadly. Am I right that essentially this Vision Zero strategy, it doesn't have to be paid for entirely out of bus fares? Because obviously, if we want to find more funding to go towards the retrofit and the replacement of your fleet to improve safety and to bring in the zero emission benefits that you get when you do replacements as well, we wouldn't want to be saying that needs to come entirely off bus fares. So presumably there is a wider pot. I guess, Lilli, you might be the right person to talk to about this. There is a wider pot of Vision Zero investment that can be drawn upon.
So I think I've understood your question.
They're not going to ask you to make it wash its face in bus fare terms. Yeah.
So obviously we have an investment programme and lots of different. I would say that almost all the investment we put into the transport network has a safety element to it, because it is our overarching priority. So we don't have, much as I might like it, we don't have a single Vision Zero pot that I sit on top of. It is basically an outcome that we're seeking from all of our investment. If I look at elements of what we're trying to achieve on buses, there's lots of different specific investment, from the research and innovation that sits in Tom's team, where there's over £1 million invested in that, through to the additional money that we would need, for example, to retrofit ISA. So we're not expecting that to be met out of bus fares. But obviously we work to set the bus safety standard, and that is something that you would then seek to agree through a contract with bus operators. But we don't set the fares. Obviously that's something that the mayor does, and so we're trying to balance what the level of investment is required to improve our safety standards and work within a fare offering to London. And shouldn't forget, we have the cheapest bus fares in the country in London, and we really want to offer an open and safe service. So I think we can do that, and we've actually shown how we can improve the safety of the network while keeping bus fares really affordable.
Okay, that's really helpful. And you said before you'll send us some indications of the investment needed on that.
If I could just pick up very quickly, I mean, it's important to say that part of the wider bus action plan is to encourage more people to use public transport, and in particular buses, so that we're looking to increase the income we get from buses by having more people using them rather than using less sustainable modes there. So that's the wider bus action plan, and why we link together safety with a customer offer and zero emission in a way that really can harness that the best it can. And to reinforce the point that travelling by bus remains the safest way to travel on the road network in London. So being a passenger on a bus is the safest way to get around London compared to other modes. And alongside the affordability of the bus fare, we want to make sure that we remain as an attractive option as we possibly can to as many Londoners as possible.
Okay, thank you for adding that. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you very much. If I can now go to Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. The 2024 specifications also include a mandatory advanced emergency braking. I understand that there were some initial concerns with it because it was incorrectly detected collision risk when there was none. So that could have those inadvertent consequences. Has that problem now been resolved? And I don't know whether any buses are in operation at the moment with them, and how has it been? I don't know, Tom.
Yeah, so I'll pick that one up if that's okay. So thank you. So AEB, Advanced Emergency Braking, is, for me, I think one of the most important parts of the 2024 standard. It's using technology to really support the driver and to be able to respond to something that's happening on the road network quicker than human reactions. So it's using sensors that can improve that 1 to 1.5 second reaction time that a good alert driver will have, can hopefully respond to that much quicker. One of the big concerns has been what's called false positives. So the detector thinks something's happening, applies the brakes when it needn't to. Now, we've done a lot of research on that, and we've identified that actually that risk is still there, but it's much lower than we thought it would be. And overall, while it is not a zero risk that will happen, overall the benefits to those incidents that are avoided outside the bus far outweigh the risk to creating what's called false positive incidents on board the bus. So there are no buses in service with AEB working at the moment. It's being built into the buses. It's not being switched on immediately. So that's potentially one of the areas to Assemblymember Berry's question earlier on around whether or not we might give a derogation so that it's on board but not switched on yet, so we can ensure that happens. But it's obviously a key area that we will need to monitor really closely when it is put in place to make sure that it does behave in service as the testing has shown. We've done a lot of shadow testing, so we've run buses in London for hundreds of thousands of kilometres, looking at how the sensors would behave if it was turned on, and that's helped us set up the system in a way that we believe gets those false positives to an absolute minimum number that there are. Can't say there won't be any, there probably will be, but we think that number is going to be a really low number now, and therefore the benefits it has to reducing incidents and the level of severity of incidents. I think it's also important to say that it may not prevent an incident or a collision happening, but if the bus has got an extra 1.5 seconds to slow down from 20 miles an hour to perhaps 5 miles an hour, that therefore will reduce the consequences of that impact and that collision there, and hopefully will change what could be a serious injury into just a minor injury. And that's the way that we're hoping that AEB will roll out and make a big difference. And I think it's also worth picking up on the point from the earlier panel. AEB has been common on cars for a while, and particularly also perhaps for coaches on motorways. The AEB in a London environment with so many moving activities around the vehicle, that's a far more complex application of this. And again, I think we're the first place in the world to apply AEB to buses in London. So, yeah.
Thank you. John, did you want to come in?
I did, thank you. So I've been the managing director for Abellio London for 2 years. Now, prior to that, I was the engineering director for 5 years. So I was involved in a lot of the early trials around the shadow testing and everything else as well. And I think, again, for the bus safety standard, I mean, Tom spoke before about this is a world-leading standard, essentially, for a number of different technologies, and AEB is one of them, I think, because if you look at these technologies in automotive, in haulage, they've been in cars since the Mercedes S-Class, the Volvos, etc., for decades. And then you look at haulage, they've been in Volvo trucks and Scanias for probably the last 10 to 15 years. The challenge is that we have an unsecured load compared to automotive or to haulage, essentially. So understanding the impact of the impact, but that false positive is a much greater risk for us with standing passengers than it is for haulage or it is for trucks, etc. A lot of the technology is the same, but understanding the context of the use has been the real challenge. And I think as well, most of those technologies, they deactivate when you get down to around 10 to 15 miles an hour. So essentially, using the same logic, it's not easily transferable across into London environments. So that's why we spent a lot of time just running them in shadow mode, understanding the context, etc.
Okay, so it's actually quite nuanced. You see, I'd assumed when I read this that it was just an emergency stop immediately, but it's not. It's actually much more nuanced than that. Is that right?
So you can't apply the brakes that hard, and it would probably be disproportionate to do so because of the consequence of that. Yeah. So absolutely setting the cadence of that braking is a really important part of that, because I don't think we should ever give the impression that it means that it would be perfectly safe to walk out in front of a vehicle coming to it 20 miles an hour. It won't be. Yeah. That's the wrong thing. It will reduce the consequence of that action, but it won't eliminate injury fully to potentially to the person on the road. We've got to get that balance right. So we do realise, as John said, we've got a bus that could well have 90 people on board versus the person outside, and getting that balance right is a really challenging piece there. But as within Vision Zero, our aim is to reduce the number of killed and seriously injured, and to move everyone down that scale. Getting the balance right on AEB is critical to doing that.
Thank you. And when do you think you're going to turn them on?
I think we'll have to come back to you on that date. There's a bit more to go through on that. We want to make sure it's right rather than being perhaps perceived to be targeting a particular date.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now look to Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about what's going on with the 2024 standard, but obviously you're probably starting work on the 2027 one. You said you're looking to refresh it, looking at innovation approaches. So what perhaps new technologies are you looking to introduce? Where are you looking to learn what's best practice and where that standard will go?
So absolutely. So it's I guess the key areas that we're looking at now, and we do need to go off and let the researchers do that work properly, rather than perhaps prejudging what it is. But the areas where I would expect to see changes are in the cab design. So we heard a little bit earlier on about potentially how that could improve or affect a driver's performance. We've put a lot of new technology on. We need to review how that is used and displayed as a way of simplifying the cab layout. We need to really focus on the design more generally of the cab. So we know that in the industry at the moment, only about 10% of our driving workforce are female. And that's potentially partly down to the ergonomics of the cab, that they may be designed for men rather than for women. So how can we make sure that we design the cabs to encourage as many people as we can into the industry that are able to do that job, and within that really set the cab up in a way that it is their office perhaps, and far more human factors are built into that as well. And we're doing some road shows around the country next year to get not just London experience of that, but to the point earlier on from Assembly Member Boff, making sure that we get experience from beyond that as well. I think fatigue is obviously going to be part of that as well, and making sure that we design a cab in a way that doesn't cause fatigue, and make sure that we kind of consider that in the whole way around the comfort there as well, making sure that the work we've already done to improve the thermal comfort in the cab, is that working effectively enough, or is there more that we need to do there as well? And it's around looking at emerging challenges. There's 2 or 3 years. We need to probably settle on what that looks like in the next year or two to give manufacturers the opportunity to build it into the designs. But it's looking at those emerging trends, looking at those trends around injuries to customers on board buses. What more can we learn about those to put in there? So open question to the researchers around this, looking at the evidence and the data there, rather than perhaps us saying this is definitely what we're going to see in there.
Will it include other measures, not just the design of the vehicles, but actually some of the other issues we heard in the first panel around the contracts that you have with bus companies, around some of the other issues around rostering? Will you be looking to sort of what's best practice there, looking at the researchers and research that's provided to maybe mandate in those areas too?
So this bit of work is specifically on the vehicle design itself. So it's the structure of the vehicle and how that then interacts with customers and drivers. Anything beyond that, that would be part of a wider part of the bus safety programme.
Okay, so that's part of the wider, but will that sit alongside this? Because you can have the most fantastic vehicle and, I absolutely get you're leading the way there, but then it's the other stuff that goes around it.
Yeah, I think that falls into... so we recently did our Vision Zero refresh, if you like, which was 21, with the assumption that over the next couple of years we'll be refreshing that. So anything more widely, specifically on buses, be that training, be that customer communications, will sit within that framework. Because we also need to think about how we're changing the road network itself and working with boroughs to change their road network. So the short answer is yes. And what I think we are sharing with you, is that we want to have an evidence-led approach to this in London, but that also means that it's an evolutionary approach. So we will do what we know with the evidence we have to reduce risk, and as new evidence emerges or we work with innovation to identify new improvements, we'll then up the standards or up the approach.
Great, thank you. And then I want to just talk about international comparisons. We've talked about the international bus benchmarking. Be useful, just before I go into my question, Tom, are you able to tell us the other cities that are in that sort of benchmarking? Because you said some are comparable and some just really aren't. Are you able to give us a flavour of them? I
don't have the list with me, I'm afraid. And I'm assuming that we do publish who they are, but in which case I can make sure we have a list afterwards. I don't have the list with me, I'm afraid.
Okay. I think it'd just be useful to know. I understand you won't precisely put which data goes to which city, but it would just be useful to know who we're comparing with. But in the latest benchmarking report, it shows that bus collisions in London are higher than other international cities, the average. What are you learning from that benchmarking, and what changes are you making as a result? Because that's what it's there for, isn't it, to learn from?
It is. So we're learning some about those cities where it is comparable to look at them. I think the challenge is that some of those cities I mentioned earlier on are very much kind of redesigned grid systems where perhaps the buses don't travel as close to the curb as they do in London, and perhaps the pavements aren't as crowded as they are in London. And perhaps there's not as much congestion because they've got different ways in which they operate. So we do engage with them. In fact, the group was over early this summer, and a number of the team engaged with them while they were over with those other cities while over there this summer. I think we're looking probably more at the comparable cities in the UK and directly in Europe, some of whom aren't members of the IBBG, in terms of where some of the more comparable cities are. IBBG is useful for a number of things, and absolutely we do compare the absolute outcomes of that as well, but it's not always the most helpful thing in some of those areas to do direct comparisons because they are different backgrounds.
Perhaps you could write with some of the detail of those cities you're comparing, and just to give us that flavour, because I'm always keen that we learn from international best practice. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question. This is to you, Lilli, but actually I'd be very grateful if you could just give me a detailed written answer. First of all, I'd like to know how TfL is promoting a positive safety culture, and also how you assess the safety culture of the bus operators. If you could give us a detailed written answer to that, I'd be very grateful. And then I'd like to know how TfL ensure, this is not a written issue, I'd like you to answer this question, how you ensure that pressure on buses to keep to their time doesn't come at the expense of safety.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to pick up those elements on culture in writing, but obviously just to sort of say more generally, this is genuinely our top priority and is something that is at the heart of our strategy. So it is something that at a leadership level, from the Commissioner, myself and others, we will talk about very frequently, and we will also be putting in place sort of active and open conversations to encourage that. So can you just remind me?
Sorry, yes. So how does TfL ensure that pressure to run buses on time doesn't come at the expense of safety?
So I'll ask Tom to come in on this as well. But I mean, one thing to say is that obviously that overall leadership approach on safety is how we also interact with the bus companies themselves, and is very much part of that, and how we also roll out and sort of set the context for training for our drivers. More specifically, I think you'd be interested in the management of schedules, and there was much discussion in the first panel about whether there was a tension between reducing speed limits and timetables. That work, as I understand, and Tom can elaborate on it, is absolutely something that we bear in mind, and that those schedules are being reviewed in line with relevant speed limits. So I don't know if you just wanted to add.
Could I say, Tom, would you be kind enough to write to me on that?
Okay,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
That'd be very kind. Thank you. I'd like to ask John, do you keep records of buses that exceed the speed limit?
We have records where we know that the driver's caused an offence. Essentially, if the bus has been speeding, if it gets reported through it, whether it be a customer complaint, a public complaint, etc. Knowing that coming through the intelligent speed assist around the speed awareness tool, essentially as well, that will come through as well to understand if there's patterns of behaviour around speeding by route, by depot, etc. So it's built in essentially, so we can build a picture. So that helps then to understand how we build schedules around that, so we can use that as one of the input measures.
Can I ask you, in light of a number of, actually, Abellio, which roughly what area of London do you cover?
So we've got depots in central London, West London and Croydon, essentially, as well.
Okay. So bearing in mind that some of those areas, they've now reduced the speed limits to 20 miles an hour. Have you had conversations with TfL about adjusting the bus timetable to take into account those lower speeds?
We do, and again, all of our schedules are under constant review. So essentially, we have a schedules policy that we agree with Unite that has the parameters set for what the drivers can and can't work essentially within those set safe parameters. And then we use that to build up a schedule based upon the headway that's required for the contract, essentially put the two together and then build a safe and compliant schedule from that that's then tested against Unite's metrics. So that will be handed back to the schedules rep within the depot. They will then test that route to understand that they're happy with it. There's a full 35-day consultation period, and then we'll then implement then essentially. So we look at how the resources need to be deployed, whether there's excess time in one part of the route, whether it be a certain time of day, and then we pull that from one, from a quieter time essentially onto a busy time, or it's invested essentially from TfL or from ourselves.
But those are negotiated before you renew the contracts. So mid-contract you can renegotiate those times based on the fact that there are slower speed limits.
All the time. So essentially we have, every period we have an account meeting with a dedicated account manager from TfL. They look at our compliance essentially within excess wait time on routes, but also looking at other compliance metrics around driver quality monitoring to check that there's no speeding that's coming through around the checks that are done. The bus customer experience scores, that there's no sort of data suggesting that the driver might need to be rushing, etc. So all that's built up, and then if there are any outliers or any routes that have a problem, then that's, we take that away. We work with the schedules rep within the depot for that route and the local management team and put together an alternative, and then we go to TfL and we look at how that's best funded or changed then essentially.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Garrett.
Afternoon. Just on this culture thing, you said it was a top priority, Lilli. I'm not aware that the Commissioner's report to the TfL board includes the sort of KSI figures, the number of people hospitalised, number of people killed over the period of his report. I can't say that I read every page of every one, but I sort of dip sampled. I couldn't see it in there. Have I missed it? Does the TfL board get made aware of how many people are killed and hospitalised by TfL's buses?
So every Commissioner's report starts with safety. If you look at usually the first paragraph heading will be about safety. It will talk obviously about our performance, and it will also note if there have been notable incidents, whether it's on the underground network or on the bus network, it will highlight those for the board. It doesn't necessarily list every single one, but as I mentioned earlier, so we meet as a board quarterly. We also meet as a safety and sustainability panel quarterly. The quarterly report for the safety and sustainability panel does include the most up-to-date quarters safety statistics relating to buses. So that information is absolutely shared with the board and its panel members and is made publicly available, yes.
So it goes to the panel but not the board?
The panel is the board. It is also... so the panel
is the panel not a subset of the board?
The panel is a subset of the board, but it is also... I prepare an annual report to the board on health and safety. And as I said, every commissioner's report, the first section does refer to safety. So I think I also communicate very frequently with board members. They have an ample opportunity to interrogate me on this.
The example of one I looked at was December last year, I think. In that period, there was a fatality. It was not mentioned. And you said the first section of the Commissioner's report is about safety, but it doesn't say, in this period, our buses have hospitalised this many people and possibly killed that many people. That information is not routinely included, you're saying?
So... Well, I think we could debate this. Certainly,
it is included or it isn't included.
So safety, a safety overview is included in every commissioner's report. That commissioner's report looks at the performance of the previous quarter. So unfortunately, if something had happened in the previous week, it might not be in that report because it's reporting the previous quarter, but it will include the performance on the buses. And it does indeed call out sometimes when there are individual episodes which are particularly noteworthy or we think require further investigation.
But I found an example of one where there had been a fatality and the fatality was not mentioned. And you say if there's been an incident, but there's dozens of people hospitalised every month. So over a quarter, it's guaranteed that there will be some number of people hospitalised and that you could break that down by slips, trips and falls, collisions and so on. Why is that information not routinely included in, say, a paragraph in the Commissioner's report to the board? Because you just told us it's your top priority.
So because it is, the Commissioner provides an overview on safety. Those data are provided to the board through the report on the Safety and Sustainability Panel, which is a publicly available report. So it's not available only to TfL board members, it's available to all of the general public and is published on our website, and that does include that data. That is provided quarterly.
Okay. I will not believe that it is your top priority unless that information is included in the Commissioner's report. The fact that it exists somewhere that TfL board members could go and find it, I just find it extraordinary that if you owned a factory or a mine, as we were hearing about earlier, if dozens of people were being hospitalised every month, that would not be brought to the attention of the board by the chair of the board or by the president or whatever the relevant title would be. I can't understand. Is it not embarrassing to you as the head of safety that the Commissioner's safety bit doesn't include every single time this is how many people we've hospitalised and possibly killed?
I would say that I take your view, and that is your view. I think the Commissioner's report gives a good overview on safety, and we absolutely do make that data transparent and available. Okay.
So thinking about fatigue specifically, I'm just conscious that when we've spoken in this section with you about safety, you've tended to concentrate on hardware. And in the earlier panel, actually, there was a big concentration on human factors, fatigue. I would argue the most important safety feature of a bus is the driver. So thinking about fatigue, what some of the examples of things we heard about earlier, toilets maybe not working, maybe not at the end of every route, rostering, safe rostering processes, heat in cabs, cold in cabs, and timetable pressure. We've spoken a bit about timetable pressure just now. But in terms of tackling fatigue among drivers, obviously there's some technology, and I'm sure you're going to tell me about the technology. I'm concerned about the human factors. Are you confident that the human factors are being dealt with properly?
So, yeah, I'll hand to Tom to talk a bit more about buses. But fatigue is obviously an issue that affects all of us, and it affects all of our transport systems that we need to monitor and manage for and work to ensure that people feel free to have that open dialogue about whether they are feeling fatigued. And we have a pan-TfL fatigue programme which is based on developing that and giving managers the tools to have those conversations. So just with respect to buses, Tom, do you want to give an overview?
So if I just talk a little bit about the welfare bit, first of all, I'm going to hand to John about the kind of, because he manages the drivers day-to-day in terms of rostering, his team do. So in terms of welfare, John Murphy's absolutely right. That is a real challenge. We're in the middle of a programme of refurbishing the welfare facilities, the brake facilities that we provide. They'd probably been forgotten for too long, and a lot of those were in pretty poor condition, honestly. They're not all fixed yet, but there's a programme that's making some really good progress. Very happy to share with you some of those examples of where we've done that to really show that commitment to improving it. Toilets as well, refurbishing those. There's a lot of view that perhaps they're in, that's fine, but they get heavily used. They need to be refurbished and renewed regularly as well. So there's a big programme going on within our asset team to ensure that we do that. We've done a lot of work on the driver and the fatigue risk management. All operators now have a fatigue risk management plan in place. We're now supporting that by providing some additional expertise to ensure that there is better consistency between some of those plans, and where the operators in some cases might need a little bit of extra support with that, recognising that some are part of big groups and perhaps some don't have that resource available to them. We're giving extra resource to that as well to make sure that those plans really do come to life in the way that they're not just written down on paper, but they're actually being lived by everyone in the company, because it's not just the drivers that are an area of focus here, it's everyone, the supervisors, the controllers, right the way up to the board, to ensure the decisions are made in the context of the driver well-being. But I think John can probably give some examples more physically about what he's doing with drivers in his team.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So, as Tom said, every operator has a fatigue risk management system in place, and TfL and TRL are providing some independent assessment of those, to ensure there's all the best practice that's found in each of them is shared across all the operators. So, in our draft, I think we're on revision 4 of ours now, so it's been in place since around 2020 now. So we've got a policy that's been agreed with Unite. Covers schedules, safe rostering, allocation of drivers, etc., as well as around facilities and other elements, and also around support that we offer to drivers around counselling and assistance around behaviours and their own sleep patterns and things like that as well. But certainly for us, clearly, all the domestic drivers' hours are set by government, essentially, the parameters. We have a set of controls in place that we've then added in a safety margin within that around the length of a driver, the length that a driver would need to be behind the wheel before they need to take a break. We've then extended the breaks beyond what the rules state. And then within that, we build those into our rostering systems, into our scheduling systems, to make sure that we've always got the safety margin within those parameters. And we include Unite and driver representatives within those controls.
Professor Morris gave us earlier, so I'm just very conscious of time. I can hear them muttering over here about withdrawing questions, so let's try and be brisk. Professor Morris earlier was talking about sort of industry best practice in terms of rostering. Are we confident that we're all following that? John, as a operator, and Lilli, as with an overall view, are you confident that those industry best? Yes. Okay, that's
we are.
Perfect answer.
Yes.
Short and positive. Lilli, are you confident that all operators can say yes to that question? On heat, when I ask TfL about heat in cabs, I tend to get a sort of quite positive answer. And you probably were sitting here earlier when you heard the answer from the union. They don't agree with you. Why do you think there's a gap between what you say and what they say? Or maybe there isn't a gap?
So I think there is, I think it's fair to say that there is a bit of a gap in the reality of what some drivers experience. We have had issues of air conditioning. So all buses have got an air conditioning unit fitted to the driver's cab. A number of those are quite old, and those systems that were designed for temperatures that we weren't planning to see 10 years ago, 14 years ago when those were installed. Obviously, the summer temperatures in London have gone up quite significantly in the last probably 4 or 5 years. So there's probably a bit of a difference going on between the effectiveness of those older air conditioning units in the hotter temperature. Those will get replaced soonest because they are vehicles that will be replaced soonest as well. And retrofitting air conditioning to a bus is a very difficult, it's basically integral to the bus, so it's quite a difficult thing to adapt. But maintaining those systems has been an issue in some cases, and we've been very focused in our discussion with operators to ensure that they do maintain those systems and they service those systems in a way that keeps them cool in the summer. And on new vehicles, we have upped the specification significantly to put a more powerful unit in. However, the challenge is those new vehicles will take a number of years to go into the fleet as well, so it's around maintaining that system in the short term to make sure that the systems that are there work as effectively as they can in hot weather.
Okay.
That's one part. The other part is cold, and John, I think you've been doing some work particularly on how you can perhaps look at addressing both of those, if that's
Can I just a very quick question? Let's say it's a 35-degree hot day.
Yeah.
Roughly what percentage of drivers are going to be driving around not in an adequately cooled cab, would you think? Because that's the real benchmark.
It's a difficult question to answer because individuals have got different points at which they feel the heat
Okay.
there. Some, the panel here, we might all have different experiences of what is comfortable and what's not comfortable there. The aim is to ensure that the cabs are as comfortable as possible by cooling them down and ensuring in the cases where it does get too hot for that individual that there are mitigations in place. They feel able to report that vehicle for not being for being too hot, and if necessary to take appropriate breaks during the day, if need be during the route if they feel unsafe to continue driving, and there's a process in place where that's managed.
I need to interrupt because our colleagues want to ask questions after me, and there's another section. But do you have a sense of what percentage of bus drivers? Because we see examples, anecdotal examples, and I'm trying to understand: is it 10%,
Sorry,
20%?
Sorry,
two buses in the whole.
Can I just say to Tom, can you give us a percentage roughly?
I can't today.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you write to us? Because I think that's the key. Thank you, Chair. I think
Thank you very
that's
much.
me done.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One was about pedal confusion and any kit updates there might be, and also around targets, safety targets and related bonuses. But if we can ask those in writing, would that be okay, so we can cut a bit of time off? Thank you. Just to warn you what's coming.
It's very kind of you,
Thank you,
Assembly
Chair.
Member Baker. That ends our panel 2 discussion, and so we'll take a short break to introduce panel 3.